Thanks so much, David and Nirali. I'm excited to be joined by Sherene Jose, who's the VP and Chief of Staff for Mastercard. Over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be discussing digital and the consumer. Welcome to the festival, Sherene.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person, but better safe than sorry, right?
Absolutely. That is exactly the theme of the moment with COVID and everything going on. So thank you, though, for still dialing in. It's great to have you here. And I mean, we're going to have a really exciting discussion about digital and the consumer. Now, you joined me previously on the podcast and we've had such a great response. So I'm so glad you could dial in and chat to us in the festival. And I'm going to jump straight into it. Talk me through what you mean when you say digital identity, because I know you've got a great story there.
Right. So just to provide a bit of context on where I'm coming from and which part of the business I sit in Mastercard, I sit in cyber and intelligence solutions within Mastercard, which probably means nothing to you until you realize how many of our solutions you actually use day to day. So to give you an idea of some of the solutions that you use as a consumer, the chip and pin technology, the EMV chip that sits in the front of your credit card, that technology sits under the C&I business in Mastercard. In the digital transaction space, have you noticed once you add your card on like a Netflix account, even if you renew or replace your card, you don't have to key in your card details again. That's again, thanks to a card continuity solution from our business. So as you can see, there's been a lot of solutions that affect the day-to-day of consumer experience. And to that end, we constantly worry about problems which make consumer lives hard. And one of those problems is the lack of a robust solution for digital identity. Now, what does digital identity mean, to your question? It's there's a funny saying on the internet, you could be a dog and no one would know, right? So despite, especially in the last year and a half, our entire lives being transported to the digital sphere, there isn't a high assurance solution or a robust mechanism to positively identify someone is truly who they claim to be, right? Think about how you go about thinking about applying for a loan from a bank. You apply online, but then you walk into the branch to show your identity documents. Think about when you set up your tax account. Something has to come in the post to confirm your address details. Or you purchase alcohol from an online merchant. The delivery person has to see that it is someone of age to receive the delivery. As you can imagine, this gap in having a robust digital identity creates a lot of inefficiency and friction. And we define digital identity as the collage of data that makes you you. It's what defines the individual. This can be your name, your address, date of birth, and also attributes like your passport number, employment status, and so on. Our idea is not to be a repository of all this data, but to confirm or to decline something about you so that you can access a service as appropriate. An example of this, to go back to that example that I just mentioned about placing an order for alcohol. Why does your merchant need to know your entire date of birth? All that they need to know is whether you're over 18 or not. And that's the kind of solution that we're aiming for.
I mean, it's so interesting when you think of identity, you take it for granted how physical that currently is. And, you know, as we said with the pandemic, it might be you need to go into branch, as you say, to qualify who you are is who you are. But what happens if those branches are all closed because we're in lockdown? Suddenly life stops, but we know that life continues when it comes to the need for those loans or, as you say, purchasing alcohol or other prohibited age limit items. You know, that type of life continues, whether in-person elements have to pause. So it's really, really crucial, I think, for many organisations. Suddenly, this very big need was really, really accelerated. So I'm keen, as we always like to do here at Business of Data, is to really draw this into examples for you within the organisation. So how are you working within digital identity and the consumer within Mastercard?
So our whole approach towards digital identity is very much consumer-centric. In fact, we had released a paper a couple of years ago delineating the detailed principles behind this ambition to develop this digital identity solution. And one of the key factors there is that it's a consumer-centric model. A consumer should be able to say, I own my data and I control my identity data. Today, as a consumer, I can tell you I have no idea how many different websites have information about my date of birth, my address, and random things that honestly I'm not comfortable sharing with random strangers and leaving it in various servers for potential hackers to discover, right? So we need a solution which is simple, smart, and secure. And to that end, we are looking at bringing together businesses, service providers, merchants, much the way that we do today with payments, right? Mastercard does not hold cash. We create infrastructure for your money to be transported from your bank to the merchant using a protocol that is standardized around the world. So in that sense, we are quite well qualified as a company to be a credible player in the space of digital identity, because instead of money, we would be transferring personal data without holding it. We don't want to hold personally identifiable data, but we want to be able to convey a confirmation from the bank, yes, this person is 18 and can continue this transaction because they're eligible as a consumer of age to purchase alcohol, for example. The aim here is to ease the burden of proof for consumers. To that end, your identity elements may be bound to your device, which everyone now uses using biometrics to place transactions, right? Payment transactions. So you could very well use your biometrics to confirm your identity as well. And we see impact from this, benefiting not just consumers in terms of much more seamless transactions, but also reducing overall cost to the ecosystem, because banks face a high degree of cost in KYC, enrolling consumers at the point of account creation. And generally, through e-commerce, merchants have to put in a lot of different hurdles to ensure people are who they claim to be. And more recently, we've been able to leverage our capabilities in digital identity to go into more specific use cases. For example, we are in the process of developing a solution called Good Health Pass Collaborative in partnership with a number of other players like ICC to create interoperable digital health pass systems as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a fantastic, so much in there. Sherene, I want to pick out, it was all incredibly valuable. I think that at the top of your answer there, when you said about how many organizations and brands have data on you, I think even us within the data analytics community would be shocked how much information's out there. And I think that's really interesting what you say about, using what the end user already uses, so that biometrics. We all know that we should be living by that the customer is king. Their experiences, their success is what we should all be banding around. But that's sometimes easier said than done. So how do you keep the customer front of mind for everyone within your team, within your department, and within your organization? How do you anchor it back to your consumer?
Right. So Mastercard as an organization thinks of its success within the context of the broader ecosystem we exist in. And we can't thrive if the whole ecosystem isn't thriving. And I think that was a lesson that which was very much hammered home in the last year and a half, while a lot of merchants suffered through the pandemic and so on. I'm going to unpick that question around customer-centric. We think of customers in multiple ways, right? We are a B2B2C company. Our own customers are banks, merchants, processors, and what have you. And then you have our customers, which would be the consumers who use the credit cards or payment instruments, whether it's debit, prepaid credit card. And we try to optimize for both ends of that, both our customers and the consumers. I'll give you a couple of anecdotes to give you a feel for how we have a customer-centric approach. If you hark back to, I don't know, like 15 months ago from now, at the height of when the lockdown was just announced, all of us were sitting on our phones and trying to call our airlines and hotels to cancel, various booked experiences. Oh, I'm not going to go on that holiday. I'm not going to stay in that hotel. I want my money back. This is also the time that merchants were asking their staff to work from home without having necessarily all that infrastructure necessary to work seamlessly. So you have merchants struggling with their operations. You have consumers desperately trying to get their money back. And there was a lot of frustration. Consumers were like, well, I'm not going on the holiday, so I want my money back. I'm going to call my bank and file a dispute, right? I want my money back. You can imagine this was happening in millions. Now, the dispute process has always been in place with the idea of avoiding fraudulent transactions. We could have just sat back and be like, okay, guys, this is payday. Let the dispute processes go on. But it's disproportionately expensive to merchants. And that would be a really bad time to let them face that cost. So what Mastercard did was partner with, especially aviation and hospitality industry, to find alternative ways to cancel those transactions instead. Canceling the transaction and issuing a refund to the customer or issuing a credit to the customer would be a much cheaper and efficient process than going through the dispute process. And to that end, we luckily had technology to deploy, which allowed banks and merchants to collaborate when banks got a call saying that this is a dispute, so that the merchants could just cancel the transaction without having to pick up that customer service call and without going into the dispute process. I think this is a classic example of partnering, especially at a time of crisis, to ensure a sort of win-win-win solution, right? Banks are happy, merchants are happy, consumers are happy. And all it takes is just thinking a bit extra and deploying your solutions a bit differently to ensure minimal costs and maximum benefit.
Absolutely. And as you say, it is win-win, but it's also thinking about, as you say, the benefit of not going through the dispute system means that it is financially better off for both you and the merchants. But then it's that customer experience as well. You're stressed. Many people were put on furlough. They didn't know how long it was going to be for. Many people watching this may have experienced it themselves. And suddenly you're trying to claw back some money that you've spent on a holiday. You don't want to be on the phone trying to work out where your money's come from. These sorts of systems and the way that data can enable it can really reduce stress, increase customer experience. And for many people, it may even mean repeat business, because you think, oh, wow, weren't they so brilliant during a time that I really needed them? I'm going to continue my business with them. So it's, as you say, it's absolute win-win. So to pivot the conversation slightly, when we're talking digital and the consumer, how much emphasis do you put on the outside world and the consumer influencing what you do digitally? As you say at the beginning there about the biometrics, people are very used to opening their faces now. So opening their devices with their faces now, I should say. So how much do you think the wider world that the consumer is used to influences internal digital processes? Or do you think it's slightly the other way around, that you're really influencing that consumer as well?
So I think there's a process, right? When we started entering this realm of digital transactions, it was very much a sort of risk-averse mentality, with good reason, because people didn't know how consumers behaved in the digital sphere, how fraudsters behaved in the digital sphere. So there tended to be a lot of hurdles to ensure security, for example, and minimize fraud losses for banks and merchants. This is, again, I'm going into a specific example here. As a consumer, you would know of the many hurdles that you have to go through a digital transaction. You log into the merchant's website with a password. You have to remember to key in all the details correctly into the card field. And you likely have a one-time password to confirm the transaction. And it used to be even more painful earlier, where you may have to confirm a transaction on a call with the bank and so on. Now, each of these hurdles is very well-intentioned, right? It's to maximize the security of the transaction. It is to ensure the consumer is protected, the bank is protected, and so on. But having that consumer-centric and customer-centric model in our mind, we are constantly thinking about how do we make this process easier? How do we take the friction out of the experience, right? I remember joking with you about this, Kat. If you want zero fraud, approve zero transactions, but that's not what we are aiming for. What we are aiming for is a seamless consumer experience while keeping customers happy too. And to that end, we partner with flagship customers to understand how consumers behave, what are the what are they seeing that we may not be seeing. Especially large tech players often are ahead of the curve in the understanding of digital consumers, and then just being ruthless about using every tool at our hand. Using AI, behavioral analytics, biometrics, what have you. But at the same time, being respectful of consumer privacy. We don't retain personally identifiable information, but we have the benefit, being Mastercard and a global company, of seeing transactions in billions around the world. So there's a lot of intelligence that we can glean just by identifying anomalies and patterns, and using that to ultimately make the lives of consumers easier, and therefore improve the brands of our customers as well. That's back to merchants and processors.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you brought up the privacy element, because I think it's something that is so front of mind for so many consumers now. It was definitely on the data analytics community radar and has been for years, but I think the layperson now, with various stories coming out in the media, are heightening their awareness to their own data, their own privacy, and what choices they have as well. Now, the last question I want to ask you, Sherene, and I know I mentioned it on our podcast together, you are probably one of the first chief of staffs I've personally interviewed in the data analytics community, and it excites me that you engage within the community so well, because obviously traditionally we have our data officers, our analytics officers, so it's so great to have you so active within the community given your job role. Now, I know within your role, departmental communication is really well within your remit. So when it comes to, as you said earlier, communicating that customer message, having that anchored down, that you're really providing this digital experience in the best way possible, how do you overcome that siloed mentality that this is their job, or the customer experience belongs to them? How do you make sure that everyone holds that, and how do you deal with that mentality of silos, as I say?
I think what Mastercard has done really well over the last few years is really putting the customer at the center of all the thinking. When you're building technology, when you're building a product, when you're building infrastructure, the customer is always at the center. And it's something that the organization has had to work on, obviously, right? Because the temptation in early years would have been to build a really good product and the people will come. But that is very much not the way we think about it now. We engage deeply with customers in every region. It's a very global organization, and Mastercard recognizes that every region has its own quirks and needs and regulations. And to that end, partner with customers, listen to what unique problems they might be facing in their respective regions, and sometimes even co-create solutions. Pilot something that we think might work well with a particular customer in a particular region. Market feedback might indicate that it's not working as well, then pivot. And often it's a partnership. And to that end, there aren't many parts of Mastercard who don't get to sort of hear the voice of the customer. If they're not on the front line engaging with the customer, pretty quickly all the insights from those interactions with the customers are shared across the organization. So that really helps with doing away with the siloed mentality that the customer is someone else's problem and I just build the technology.
Sherene, absolute pleasure to have you join us on the festival. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kat. Have a good day.